HCI Lesson 13, Guidelines for Dialog Design. Introduction. Dialogue is the communication between the computer and a person. Well-designed dialogue makes it easier for people to use a computer and lessens their frustration with the computer system. Recall the elements of the technology acceptance model, indicating that perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use will lead first to an intention to use the system and eventually to using it. There are several key points for designing good dialogue. They include the following. Number one is meaningful communication, so that the computer understands what people are entering and people understand what the computer is presenting or requesting. The number two, minimal user action. And number three is standard operation and consistency. So this will be explained in detail later in this video. So now, meaningful communication. The system should present information clearly to the user. This means having an appropriate title for each display, minimizing the use of abbreviations, and providing clear user feedback. Inquiry programs should display code meanings as well as data in an edited format, such as displaying slashes between the month, day, and year in date fields, or commas and decimal points in an amount field, as shown in this figure. So you can say that this one is better. It can be understood easily by the user rather than this format. So user instructions should also be supplied regarding details such as available function key assignments, and in a graphical interface, the cursor may change shape depending on the work being performed. So I believe we already have noticed that. So sometimes our pointer will change from arrow to the I-beam or maybe into an hourglass, etc. So users with less skill in using the computer or doing their tasks with the computer require more communication. Websites must display more text and instruction to guide the user through the site. Intranet sites may have less dialogue because there is a measure of control over how well trained users are. But internet graphics should have pop-up text or rollover descriptions when images are used as hyperlinks, because there may be uncertainty in interpreting their meaning, especially if the site is used internationally. Notice that EU guidelines for the display of web graphics requires that all images be labeled, so that visually impaired users will be able to hear written descriptions announced through special software. Status line information for GUI screens is another way of providing instructions for users. So if you are using Microsoft Word, we have a status bar below, and the status bar will show you some information, like for example the number of words or letters in the particular document, or what page are you already in. So these are examples of meaningful communication. So here are other examples. So here you notice here that once you point your mouse here, there will be a text that will be describing what is this item. So a tooltip, this is usually called a tooltip. So meaningful communication, easy to use help screens should also be provided. Many PC help screens have additional topics that may be directly selected during highlighted text displayed on the first help screen. These hyperlinks are usually in a different color, which makes them stand out in contrast to the rest of the help text. Remember to use icons or text in addition to color coding in order to reach the largest number of users. Many of the newer GUIs often incorporate tooltip help, just like what is displayed on the previous screen, displaying a small help message identifying the function of a command button when the cursor is placed over it. The other side of communication is that the computer should understand what the user has entered. Hence, all data entered on the screen should be edited for validity. So here are examples. So you notice here that we have Help Center. So this is actually Lazada. So we have Help Center so that especially for beginners, they can console the Help Center. And here is also the help facility of Microsoft Excel. So we have here several links actually. So we can click on this for options, and then this will open another help screen. And then the next one is minimal user action. So keying is often the slowest part of computer system, and good dialogue will minimize the number of keystrokes required. You can accomplish this goal in a number of different ways, which I'll be enumerating on the next slide. So again, we say that less talk, less mistakes. So the same is true with this. The minimal, if there's minimal user action, then there will be minimal mistakes also. And of course, since keying is the slowest part, then this will also make the performance of your software better. So minimal user action. One is, how do we do this? Now one is keying codes such as airport codes when making a flight reservation. Instead of the whole words on entry screens, codes are also keyed when using a command language interface, such as a two-letter state postal abbreviation. So on a GUI screen, the codes may be entered by selecting descriptions of the codes from a pull-down list of available options. This also helps ensure accuracy, since the code is stored as a value of the drop-down list, as well as helping to provide meaningful communication, since descriptions that are familiar to the user are selected. An example would be selecting a Canadian province and having the 2-character postal code stored. Or here's also another way. So instead of, for example, you have an application that will allow to enter Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Technology. So instead of typing the long text, we can make use of just code. So that's keying codes. So in this case, errors will be minimized, and also the words that we type is also minimized. So another way to minimize user action is entering only data that are not already stored on file. For example, when changing or deleting item records, only the item number should be entered. The computer responds by displaying descriptive information that is currently stored on the item file. Another example is when a user logs on to a website. The user ID is used to find related records such as customer record, outstanding bills, orders, and so on. So here's an example. So here, there may be no need to type the whole name of the user, because in this application, there should be a table that contains already the customer name. And the same is true with the items here. The user should not be typing the whole name of the item and maybe the price. So maybe after the user entered the item, the default price should already appear here. So that's using minimal user action. Supplying the editing characters. So for example, slashes as date field separators. Users should not have to enter formatting characters such as leading zeros, commas, or a decimal point when entering a dollar amount. Nor should they have to enter slashes or hyphens when entering a date. In general, websites are an exception to this rule, since web forms do not include slashes or decimal points. Some web forms use a series of entry fields with editing characters between them, such as parentheses around an area code. So here is an example. So instead of the user typing slash, so only the month, day, and the year will be typed. The same is true with the phone number. So that's an example of minimizing user action. Another way to minimize user action is to use default values for fields on entry screens. Defaults are used when a user enters the same value in a screen field for the majority of the records being processed. The value is displayed and the user may press the enter key to accept the default or maybe overtype the default value with a new one. GUIs may contain checkboxes in radio buttons that are selected when a web form or dialog box opens. Context-sensitive menu appear when an object is clicked with the right mouse button. These menus contain options specific for the object under the mouse. So using default values, let's say for example, in this application, if you click the add button, this will be displayed and it already displays the default transaction type, then the reference number and the date, the current date, and also the term and the date due, because of course the date plus the term will give us the date due. And here also, so it says here the quantity, because if we type an item here, then the default quantity should be 1, because there should be no item that is bought but without quantity, so the default value should be 1. And here also we already have the discount of 0, and of course that can be changed or accepted by the user. So instead of the user typing for these values, designing an inquiry or change or delete program so that the user needs to enter only the first few characters of a name or item description. The program displays a list of all matching names, and when the user chooses one, the matching record is displayed. So in this example, this is actually also from the screen we used in the previous slides. So when the user type care, you notice that here we have a list of all products with the word care. So in this case, it will be easier now for the user to select the correct product. Providing keystrokes for selecting pull-down menu options. Often these options are selected using a mouse followed by keying. Users must move their hands from the keyboard to the mouse and back. As users become familiar with the system, shortcut keystrokes provide a faster method of manipulating the pull-down menus because both hands remain on the keyboard. This helps users become efficient at their tasks, and on a PC, keystrokes usually involve pressing a function key or alt key before followed by a letter. So the figure in an example of nested pull-down menus with shortcut keys from Microsoft Visual Professional. Notice that the user who is creating a structured chart can get into a series of ever more specific menus. But I use another example here, not the Visual Professional. So here is an example. This is actually WordPad. So if you click on F, you notice that we have some of the shortcut keys. So once you're familiar with this, so instead of clicking F and then clicking here to save, we can just press Ctrl S, which is actually more efficient since our hands will not leave the keyboard. Another minimal user action. So use radio buttons and drop down lists to control displays of new web pages or to change web forms. For example, when the radio button is clicked, a drop down list may change to reflect the radio button. Choice A. A radio button choice rather. A radio button may be clicked and a form may change according to the choice. A drop down list may change, or a radio button may be clicked to move to a new web page. Drop-down lists are often provided on a web page for quick navigation. Selecting a new web page from the drop-down list takes the viewer to that page. But I think you can follow this or not, so you can also use other ways to do this. And another one, provide the cursor control for the web forms. Another displays so that the cursor moves to the next field when the right number of characters has been entered. An example would be when a user enters an area code for a telephone number, and following the entry of 3 characters, the cursor then moves to the local phone number field automatically. Entering software registration key codes is another example. The codes are often in the groups of 4 or 5 letters, and when the first field is filled, the cursor moves to the next field, and so on. The analyst should examine every field to see if automatic cursor control should occur. So these are options wherein after typing, then it moves to the next field automatically. So if this can be provided and there are no issues in providing this, then maybe that's a good option to minimize user action. So the next one, so after meaningful communication and then minimize user action, the last one is that standard operations and consistency. So number 1, locating titles, date, time, and operator and feedback messages in the same places on all displays. So if, for example, if you place your title at the top, then on all displays, the title should be placed at the top. If you place a date and time, let's say for example on the lower right side, then it should always be there. Not that, for example, in some pages it is at the bottom, in some pages it is at the top, so that is not consistent. The number 2, exiting each program by the same key or menu option. So for example, we can use escape key, for example, to exit the program. So that should be the case in all menu options or every program. So on web pages, there's often a log out image. When using programs such as Microsoft Access, use a common icon to exit the display screen. When using function keys to exit, it would be a pretty sign that use function key F4 to exit the add customer program and function key F6 to exit the change customer program. So that is being inconsistent. F4 in the other program and F6 in the other program. So it should be consistent. So that's a keyword here, consistency. Because if it is consistent, then it will be easily memorized by the user. Number 3, canceling a transaction in a consistent way, usually by pressing the escape key. So it's similar to number 2, but this is more on canceling on a PC, or by using a function key, usually F12 on a mainframe. Number 4, obtaining help in a standard way. The necessary standard for help is function key 1, so F1. And most software developers for the PC are adopting this convention. So if you're going to use also a function key for your help system, then it should also be F1 because that is a standard. Standardizing the colors used for all displays or web pages. Error messages are typically displayed in red, and use a standard combination of a color and an icon to denote an error. So the color and the icon should be standard. Remember to keep the background screen color the same for all applications. And that's why we usually use CSS or maybe a template or a library like Bootstrap or templates to create web pages, so that there will be consistency. Number 6, standardizing the use of icons for similar operations when using a graphical user interface. For example, a small piece of paper with a bent upper corner often represents a document. So it should always be used like this. So use standard images on a web page also. So again, the icon should be standard. Number 7, using consistent terminology in a display screen or website. So let's say for example, if you use the word erase to delete, then it should be erased on all screens. So it should be consistent. Not, for example, erase on one screen, then the other screen you place the delete, which actually means the same thing. So that's being inconsistent. So number 8, provide a consistent way to navigate through the dialog. For example, find a consistent way to add records or to work with a website, such as the same buttons for back and next. So again, the buttons should be the same, the location of this button should be the same. If, let's say for example, you want to add, then it should be the same all throughout your website. And then also using consistent font alignment, size, and color on a web page. So for example, if your heading is centered in one page, then it should be centered in all pages. So if the font you use is, and the size is 16, for example, for H1, for the main heading of the particular page, then it should be 16 on all pages. And the same is true with the colors. So bottom line, it should be consistent. So that ends this presentation. And again, I have presented here three guidelines for dialogue design. So these are, again, number one is meaningful communication. Then we have minimize user action. And then number three, using standard operations and consistency. So thank you very much for viewing this video.